I never want to put shame on people for their turn-ons, right?
Mm.
And I just think it's a really ineffective and actively damaging thing to do.
Mm.
So normal human curiosity should be celebrated. Arousal should be celebrated. We are, I think, voyeuristic beings by nature. We receive, 90% of our sensory input through the eyes. Many of your listeners may have read the book Sex at Dawn. I
Yeah.
don't know
Chris
if you have
Ryan.
it yourself. Yeah. But, there's a whole kind of segment in there on the idea that, God, how did he phrase it? Female copulatory exclamations might exist evolutionarily in order to call in
Yeah.
other males and voyeurs to participate in the sexual experience.
Jennifer, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad that we were able to make a time work for both of us busybodies here.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, for having me.
I want to start by talking about, let's talk about pornography.
Let's do it.
I think everybody has looked at porn, and if they say they haven't, they're probably lying. Somebody has offered you the opportunity to be a voyeur into the perhaps artificial sex life of two strangers that just met over a plumbing incident, right? And now they are fucking and sucking in the kitchen, in the bedroom. The husband's coming home, like what to do. There's this entire billions on billions dollar industry.
Yeah.
However,
Uh-huh.
many of us still want to do it. There's so much of this voyeurism. So let's first start there, right? You wrote a book called Consent, The New Rules of a Sex Education, Every Teen's Guide to Healthy Sexual Relationships. I was holding my daughter on the plane from Salt Lake City a couple of days ago, and I finished your book. Like it was just one shot. And I think that this is really relevant. But I want to know, how do you process this sort of fascination that people have with this voyeuristic experience of engaging in sex, but not actually doing the work themselves to seduce or to, foreplay with their partner in order to achieve climax or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve? Let's just start there.
Ooh, yummy, juicy questions. Let's dive in. I have a long and complex history with porn that influences my feelings about it. I discovered porn on my grandfather's descrambler machine by chance when I was 7 years old.
7.
Kind of like, yeah, 7, really young.
Wow, that is young.
Yeah, and had the experience of an arousal flood my body, combined with the sense of this was wrong, that I shouldn't have be looking at this, that this was something, I shouldn't tell anybody about. Who knows how I got that into my mind as a child, but I did. So it was like arousal and shame with excitement and secrets all at once. And I think that that's probably not a totally unusual story. We know now that we have, and that was like a long time ago. I'm pretty old, older than you are. But now we have, mobile devices, porn accessible everywhere. My son might one day be upset with me for telling this story, but when he was 8, I found in a search bar. It was like sexy girls in kissing in shower, and it was clearly typed, by
Yeah.
a child's hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I
we
gave
had
it
the
away.
we had the conversation then. But I never want to put shame on people for their turn-ons, right?
Mm,
And I just think it's a really ineffective and actively damaging thing to do.
mm,
So normal human curiosity should be celebrated. Arousal should be celebrated. We are, I think, voyeuristic beings by nature. We receive, what is it, 90% of our sensory input through the eyes. Um, Many of your listeners may have read the book Sex at Dawn. I
mm.
don't know
Chris
if you have
Ryan.
it yourself. Yeah. But, there's a whole kind of segment in there on the idea that, God, how did he phrase it? Female copulatory exclamations might exist evolutionarily in order to call in
Yeah.
other males and voyeurs to participate in the sexual experience. So I feel like this is something that goes really deep
Mm.
into our evolutionary biology. And that we should take any shame away from the discussion. That being said, uh,
I knew there was a but coming.
well, it's like I can attest to the fact that like early introduction to pretty hardcore, not totally loving images may have set my arousal template to something that wasn't the healthiest thing. That
Mm,
I've had to actually do some work in my life to come to a healthier relationship with fantasy and images
yeah.
in my mind. Um, I think the most important thing when we talk about, kids and discovering porn, adolescents and their use of porn as they begin to explore masturbation and self-pleasure, and then through into adulthood, is that it's all about conversations, right? Anything that we can bring out of the shadows into light with a partner, with a friend, with a trusted adult, with a parent, we can move through and process in a healthy way.
That's
But
right.
when, yeah, there's a shame-based culture, no communication, no conversation, that's where I think that we can start to see kind of a drift into more of the shadow side, more isolation around the experience. And I would say like the biggest problem with porn, in my opinion, is that it can be isolating,
Yeah.
right? So it takes people into their brain instead of present in their bodies. Um, and then when we're talking about partnered sexual interaction, it takes you out of that energetic connection with your partner and into fantasy. And we're seeing, this rise of, I'm not even sure I believe that there's such a thing as porn addiction. I don't know. That's debatable. It's
Yeah.
debatable. We're definitely seeing, and particularly, young male-bodied people in their, 20s and 30s are having a difficult time maintaining erection with a human female partner because the brain has been so used to this rapid fire, images with kind of escalating levels of intensity that a normal human can never replicate. So
Mm,
yeah, I know. So like I'm very pro porn. I wish that the porn industry would evolve to a way where I knew that the actors were being paid fairly, that there was full consent happening on all sides of the equation,
yeah.
that there was STI test, all of these things that we could do to make the porn industry better and healthier. Cindy Gallup's work with Make Love Not Porn has been tremendous, and I love her website. And this is extremely controversial, but I'm just going to say it. I think that we should look at, as a harm reduction technique, being able to legally give adolescents access to curated, positive, healthy versions of porn so that their arousal templates can be formed on things that aren't misogynistic or violent.
Yeah. Yeah.
damage, and that's like wildly illegal at this point, right? But in my opinion, that's one of those laws that's ridiculous. Kids are looking at porn, let's be real. So let's be able to present them with a healthier version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. I mean, that sort of says it. I want to share a story with everybody, but also for those listening, we are not the most manicured show here. And we're also on video. So if you haven't checked out YouTube, go and check that out. But I'm saying that because I want to put my camera in a tiny little bit of fine, what's it called? Focusing. So bear with me 1 second. Great, great, great. Now I feel way more, I don't know, feel way more comfortable now because you look so beautiful and you're so in focus. And here I am looking like a smear on the screen. Anyways,
You're
um,
doing great. You're doing great. And I,
thank
I
you.
love the Fimbria giving us the finger in the background.
We're gonna actually transition to that in a second.
Oh yeah.
But I also want to demonstrate a little bit of consensual sort of adult conversation right now. I want to go a little bit into you, into your person. So we haven't even
Mhm.
introduced you yet. So do I have permission to go like a little deeper into your space?
Thank you for asking, Nathan. That was very consensual of you to check in with me about that. And yes, I give you a full green light. Go ahead. I also feel pretty comfortable setting a boundary if that changes in any moment. So I'll let you know.
Boundary setting. We don't learn how to be boundary setters when we're in training. I don't know if anybody out there doesn't know you. Can you tell us a little bit about what your profession is, what your trade is, so to speak, for all those years of training that
Oh
you
my
may be sort of
goodness.
neglecting right now?
No worries. So many years. Well, okay. I'll just say it and we can laugh at it afterwards, but I'm a board certified OBGYN, so obstetrician gynecologist, and a fellowship trained gynecologic oncologist, so an MD. And I've had a kind of interesting, not fully, straight ahead career
Yeah.
path. But those are my
Those are your
credentials.
street cred. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to
Well, my
emphasize
street
for
cred
people.
comes from life. My street cred is my lived experience.
Well, that's so true. Whatever we could call, what would you call it? Not street cred. Your sort of your nerd cred.
Academic, patriarchal, Ivy Tower, blah, blah, blah.
How would the patriarchy card? I should ask that. That should be my way of introducing you,
Yeah,
doctors. How would the patriarchy, where would you fall in the patriarchy? That's actually what those
yeah,
credentials mean.
exactly. Making 70 cents on
Hmm.
the dollar to you, Nathan.
Man, well, so you and I share credentials, except I want to emphasize you and I both did fellowship. I did 1 year of what many people would call the soft sciences of taking care of people in a dignified way as they cope with life-limiting illness and eventually their end of life process. And I'll tell you about why I call it a soft science, because that's language that I'm borrowing from one of my GYN oncology friends.
Ah,
Versus how many, it's like what, 3 to 5 years, depending on the program, right? For GYN oncology.
3 years after a 4-year residency. Yeah, so
For
7 years
3 years. Okay.
medical school training.
Right, right. So this is all post-grad training, everybody. You go to med school, you go to residency. If you do want to do more, you could do multiple fellowships, but at that point you're already 45 and you haven't made any money. So
Exactly.
Jennifer went to one of the went through, I would consider one of the hardest fellowship training programs possible, which is G1 oncology. And just to give you guys some perspective, how invested you were into the quote system, the GYN oncologists, apart from maybe the surgical oncologists, were the people that could attend to almost every disaster in the abdomen or in the pelvis, in the retroperitoneal space. They were the gangsters of surgery in the OBGYN world. Now, as a result of that, and taking care of so many people with cancer, many of whom are going to die under your care, not because you did anything wrong, GYN oncologists, like give yourself a break. But as a result of that, a lot of the GYN oncologists, I think, became somewhat callous towards the human experience. And don't blame them. It's a little bit of a self-preservation. And
Mhm.
when I was in residency, I was the worst resident. I used to carry a big binder around of papers that helped to justify my lack of desire to intervene in natural physiologic childbirth, my willingness to sit with people for hours at a time, trying to understand their grapple with surgery versus radiation versus chemo versus expectant management, meaning we do nothing and we just try some alternative means or we just get back to living life. I was always the guy that was like, let's get palliative care involved. Let's get palliative care involved. And one of my attendings, I won't name them, they said, you're like Patch Adams. And I thought that was the greatest compliment.
Compliment, right?
And the next thing out of her mouth was Patch Adams was a terrible doctor.
Wow. Mm.
And I remember leaving that day. I had already sort of decided. I saw BJ Miller speak. His TED talk is somewhat, a very famous TED talk where he's a triple amputee from a burn injury that he received in college and went on to be one of the best known, world renowned, kind of public speakers in palliative care. And I decided I wanted to go that direction. And everybody, all of my attendings, a lot of my colleagues who maybe were a little bit more reserved, but my attendings were not very reserved. They saw me as giving up on people by going into that.
Wow.
And the G1 oncologist did not want me in the operating room. They didn't want me seeing their patients. They just thought I was a complete asshole. Like, how did this guy get into this program? That was really the treatment I experienced.
Mm.
And looking back, it just wasn't the path for me. This sort of high acuity maternity care. I really would prefer to do the home birth thing and whatnot. So I found my way out without belaboring your sort of life story, because I'm sure you've told it a number of times. How do you go through those years and maintain integrity for who you are and how you now show up in the world? Very much open heart, open chest. Somebody
Mhm.
I would consider, like, if we lived closer, we would be like hanging out on a regular basis. How does that happen? I mean, I feel like people say that about me. I've never seen somebody like you do that. So lay it on me.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, the real answer is I didn't, right? So I was functioning in a system in which my daily activities were often out of complete alignment with
Mm,
my inner belief system. And the sad consequence when that happens over years and years is kind of collapse, if we're being quite honest. Like I feel like that cognitive dissonance, that emotional, that blocking of the heart can only happen, um, apologies, can only happen so long before there's some kind of crisis in the system. And, I chose some years ago to close my surgical practice and to pursue some other interests, international work with cervical cancer prevention. I wrote and published a couple books. I tried to get a tech startup going for a device that would help prevent sexual assault. So I did some other things, thinking that there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't function within this system in a healthy and sustainable way. And what I've kind of come through the time that I took away from it to understand is, this is going to sound so cliche, but like, I'm not the problem here.
mm,
A system that asks physicians to put aside their own very human feelings and work kind of robotically or callously or defensively. That's the problem, right? And so I'm finding a way back to clinical medicine, and I have a practice that is opening May 1st here in Los
great.
Angeles that I'm
I'm in
really
LA.
excited about. Yeah, but it is going to be in full alignment with my heart and who I am as a person and my belief system.
Yeah.
And I believe will offer the highest level of service to my clients because of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
A lot of doctors, a lot of people who I meet along the way, they ask similar questions to what I just asked you, like, how did you find your way out or whatever? And don't doctors like, don't they give you a hard time or whatever? And believe it or not, actually a lot of doctors don't. I mean, there are a couple pricks on TikTok and whatnot who I don't even really give them the time of day.
Yeah.
But and usually there's subspecialists that have just always been the smartest person in the room, and they don't like that. I'm like, no, no, thanks, that's not for me. I'm gonna go this direction, right? But in general, doctors actually kind of like me. And I think part of it is for the same reason, that you just described, is that cognitive dissonance. I started experiencing that like day one of intern year as a resident. I think I was on the labor and delivery suite, and the mystique of birth is what drew me in here. And now I'm like manipulating these dials and things from a room with these weird screens. And like I knew that I know it sounds crazy, but I knew what I was getting into, but the
Yeah.
actual application of that, now that I'm the one taking care of them, was like not in alignment at all.
Hmm.
And as you progress through school, I mean, Stu Fishbine's a mutual friend of ours. Um, he really helped mentor me on this cognitive dissonance that I'm feeling. Like he was the one that helped me really see that in myself. And I suspect that the reason that doctors are not all that like they're not like up my ass about how I show up in the world is because they too feel that way, but nobody's
Hmm.
really given them permission to like feel into that. So I'm curious if anybody listening is out there is listening. When you started to feel that in your body, where did you feel that? Like, where was it actually coming from? Not up here. I'm suspecting it was somewhere else.
Yeah. Black hole in the center of my chest, to be very
Hmm.
specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely heart chakra, green, energetic umbilical cord connecting me to the earth. It was just, it
Yeah.
was not, I had blocked my connection. Um, but, I had been feeling that from much earlier, even. I mean,
Really.
first medical school, when we had to dissect a human body, um, I had a big emotional reaction to that because of what I perceived as the distancing effect and the, subject object.
Objectifying. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. We had female torsos kind of amputated, top and bottom with like, the exam just had an arrow somewhere. And I was like, oh my God, this is how they're training doctors to look at human patients
Yeah.
as these, you know, and then add to that the complexity of I trained at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. And there was this massive divide in the donated cadavers, right? So you had the kind of 90-year-old, Jewish, willingly donated cadavers. And
How
then
do
you
you give
had,
your body to science kind of thing? Yeah.
and then you had the 20-year-old Black males who had unclaimed bodies from the morgue,
Oh,
okay, in the same room.
for your
And
anatomy dissection.
for my anatomy dissection, and
Wow.
with no sense of, did this person give their consent? Would they want to be
Oh my gosh.
unclothed in front of, yeah, calling out Albert Einstein for, I don't know if you've rectified that situation subsequently, but that was my experience of learning human anatomy with zero discussion of the social, racial,
Hmm.
cultural appropriateness of any of this, of the economic realities of where we were working in the Bronx, and how that played into the kind of medicine that we would be offering to patients there. So I did this piece of performance art at our anatomy class, kind of had a ceremony at the end of the year, a very symbolic, plant a tree, thank the donors, right? And I I just,
Amazing.
yeah, I won't get into the performance art, but it was a protest piece. And so I've been protesting in my way since then. So, yeah.
Yeah, the anatomy lab. Again, for those who don't know, when what Jennifer is talking about is not operating on a living person. It is actually very much the corpus that was used for this soul to experience life on Earth, and the way that we care for the dead, for people who are dying. I mean, this is just as important a rite of passage if you're out there in the birth world as birth, in my opinion, and actually my direct experience. I mean, I'm not going to mince words. And since you shared, I'll share that my cadaver And this is guys like 2 weeks, maybe it was like 12 weeks. It was a long rotation. Every day you're in a formaldehyde kind of smelling room with your body there, and you're going to dissect a different part of the body. And my cadaver, interestingly, the woman who gifted herself to me in order to learn from her anatomy was a woman who had died from a clearly a very aggressive struggle with ovarian cancer. So she had what we call, peritoneal carcinomatosis. Of course, you know what that is, but basically her entire abdomen and pelvis was riddled with cancer. The omentum was this like solid block of like concrete. And of course, then the embalming fluid all mixes in there. And it was this really messy abdomen that we were operating on. But I bring that up because I will never forget. It was like first week in, we were supposed to saw her face in half. So
Yeah.
when we talk about, and we did, I didn't do it. I just felt so weird about it. But one of my colleagues who wanted to be a surgeon was like, I'll do it. And just took a hacksaw right down sagittal, right down the center of her face. And sure, we could see her sinuses and everything now, but there was no ceremony around it. There was just no real acknowledgement of what the hell we're doing. I'm sure everybody was doing it secretly, but nobody wanted to seem like the sissy that I did in residency when I was like, hey, maybe we could treat this woman with a little bit of compassion
Yeah.
because she doesn't feel like she's being seen or heard, and not on our maternity unit. I'm the chief resident. Another trip up to the principal's office, another remediation or whatever. It's like this materialistic, reductive, or what I've heard actually called a magnified view of the anatomy versus a minified, where you step back and you take in the whole story, the whole context of this person, the gestures of what the sperm and the egg are doing as they're dancing, this corona radiata forms, like all of that stuff that we learned as OBGYNs has been reduced to just arrows on a dead person who may or may not even have consented to this process of us honoring or dishonoring them, depending on what you're actually feeling inside as you're doing this work. So
Yeah.
I think it's great that you brought that up. Did you get any response from like, did your protest or activist work lead to any changes, you think?
Um, Probably not. Because I think, like you, I was seen kind of as like the weird one, you
Yeah.
know. I was,
Total freaking
yeah,
weirdos.
yeah, total weird. Thank God, right?
Yeah. Thank God
No,
for us.
I noticed and observed in my colleagues, right? So, it's not just you, a single, it's a group of students assigned to one body, was, this defensiveness, right? So, probably because there were feelings coming up in everyone, but there was this desire, to like not be an outlier and not
Sure.
be weird, to be accepted. There is this kind of joking defensiveness and callousness and I think a lot of the gallows humor that is common on medical wards comes out of that. It's like, well, actually inside I'm really uncomfortable right now, but I need to block that feeling, so I'm going to use humor, joking, ridicule sometimes, sadly, comes up as a way to not be vulnerable. And it's really a shame. And I think that it is inhibiting our ability to deeply connect with patients, clients, however, you choose to refer to them. And there's this concept, I don't know if you've explored it at all, of limbic resonance.
Yeah. I
How
think I heard that
important
through polyvagal theory. I think that's kind of in that kind of flow. Yeah, go ahead. But share. I'd love to learn more.
I feel like it is deeply important um, to health and the healing relationship that is bi-directional, by the way. That's the other thing that we need to acknowledge is this unidirectional, I'm the keeper of knowledge, I'm going to impart it to you, is, I just think, a really flawed model. How can we as two humans learn from each other?
Yeah. I mean, even there's this great book. I always bring it up, but I'll bring it up again. Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass is a
Yeah.
beautiful sort of homage to our experience with ourselves and with this objectification that we tend to lean into with every way that we show up as humans in our on our beautiful earth. And she says that in the Potawatomi language, when she was trying to learn it, this is like her lineage is Potawatomi, upstate New York, kind of. And she started getting more in touch with that, but she was already like on her path to becoming, if she hadn't already, a PhD in biology. And the botany world objectifies everything out there. Let's classify it, let's name it, let's categorize it, let's put it into a box. And then once we know what that box is, now we can start to apply it for our purposes for this thing and for this healing practice or whatever. But in the Potawatomi language, she was reflecting that there is no word for tree or
Mm,
for dandelion. There's just the word that means the beingness of a dandelion or the beingness of a tree.
mm,
And when we can start to shift, I mean, so even our language, the English language, is so reflective of a subject and object versus the beingness and the beingness. And instead of me asking, what can you do for me? The question in Robin Wall Kimmerer's language would be, what can you teach me?
exactly.
And
Oh,
it would be
mhm.
so much easier as doctors if we had and I mean, it's not just doctors, guys, that are bad people. Like, we have to get that out of our head. This is a massive medical, and you can even argue military industrial complex that has us kind of forced into thinking we have to do this thing in this way.
Yeah.
What happens when we don't have the space to just lean into a person and understand, what can I learn from you, as
Hmm.
opposed to what problem am I going to fix?
Hmm. Beautifully said. Yeah, we're so aligned in that philosophical approach to our role
Yeah.
as a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we were able to wax a little poetic there. I want to get kind of shift courses a little bit and talk a little bit about something else you talk about in your book, which again is called consent. Um, I want to ask you about the myriad of ways that now people are interrelating as intimate partners, and this goes, consent, of course, is a big part of this. But I will share a story that I shared with you, I think, on the phone before. There's pornography, and then there's this kind of voyeuristic sort of thing, like having a play party where maybe you're not even playing with other people, but you and your partner are on this couch, and there's another couple pleasing themselves on that couch. I had an experience like that at Burning Man. It's called Orgy Dome, where there's one side is we're open for mixing, and the other side is we're just going to stick to ourselves. But you're on a mattress, and that's the direction my wife and I went. We've been there a couple times now, and you're on a mattress with like really nice kind of lighting. It's kind of like low red lights, so there's not like a lot of detail, but you can see people moving in the dark, and people are just moaning, and there's you hear bodies rubbing up against one another, and some people are orgasming, other people are just like sighing with like this relief, and you hear all of this, and it's a real turn on, but it's separate from when I say I went to Orgy Dome, people are like, oh, so you guys are swingers. And it's like, well, hang on. There are so many ways that you can relate. And by the way, if you're asking if I'm a swinger, it doesn't mean that I just want that we're open to swinging with you. so, so this is where I think our language and our sort of way of showing up and the isolation of pornography kind of fails us. So I want to ask you next about this trend that we're seeing with people trying to stay married but having open relationships. I just want to get your kind of super sort of surface level thoughts around this trend. Is this the natural inclination of the human species, or is there something in our society that you think is that people are grappling with, and they're going out to seek this pleasure from other people outside of their marriages, for example?
Mm. Interesting, complex question. I definitely have no definitive answer for you. Thoughts, opinions, experiences, perspectives, but that's really all. I think anthropologists have, studied human sexual behavior around the world and come to different conclusions based on who they're looking at and who's doing the looking. That's a really important point. The effect of the observer. So yeah, I mean, they're legitimate questions as to whether monogamy is a natural state for human beings. I think I could certainly say it seems to be a natural state for some human beings.
Yeah.
I've met people who are very comfortable with monogamy. I think it becomes problematic when we have a cultural expectation of monogamy, which, I mean, if we're just being like scientists or just observers, when the stated ideal is in direct contradiction to the observed behavior patterns, like something's off, right? So, what we seem to be practicing is in this let's just say mainstream American culture is actually serial more towards serial monogamy. So multiple partners over a lifetime, but just one partner at a time is the expectation. But even with that, if you look at, and as an OBGYN, you'll just laugh because I mean, how many cases of chlamydia have you diagnosed in pregnancy? I mean, it's the reason that the I
Yeah.
goop is kind of universally applied because there's this expectation that, maybe there's been some extramarital, sex during that
Yeah.
pregnancy. And I mean, this is why we do that. Why do we give the standard to give, right, universal RhoGAM to an Rh negative woman, even if her stated partner is also Rh negative?
That is
Well,
a
because
good point. Yeah, that's a very good
yeah,
point. Go on.
I mean, as physicians, we're like, okay, what's the reality? It's like the difference between perfect use birth control and typical use birth control. There can be a 20 percentage point gap there.
Or more.
So,
Yeah.
so anyway, again, I'm about taking shame away from anybody's choices, desires, personal expression, as long as it's consensual, transparent. I think that more and more people are learning about consensual non-monogamy, which is kind of like a umbrella term that can involve any number of things from polyamory to open marriage to, swinging to, many books have been written about this, but I'm all about taking away shame, increasing pleasure, increasing communication, increasing intimacy through truly
Mm,
understanding first ourselves and then our partners, what our, desires, boundaries, fears. And I think that consensual non-monogamy can actually lead to amazing communication and incredible self-discovery and improved intimacy through that process of self-discovery.
yeah.
So I'm a fan of people exploring their sexuality in whatever way they feel best.
Yeah. Man, amen. There's a couple directions we could go here with this. The reason I asked was obviously not because we're gonna, settle this once and for all, but also because I don't think it's for everybody. I think a lot of people maybe even feel compelled because of the things that they see. This person, this podcaster is doing this open marriage thing, and he has the two women he has sex with, and it's like, gosh, that sounds really, really great. And then they try it and their marriage falls apart. And it's like, well, why did that happen? Who really knows? But what was the actual impetus for you to do that? Was it a lack of communication with your partner? Was it actually a lack of sexual gratification? Um, who knows? There's all these different things, but it seems
Mhm.
like at least in my communities, people are trying this and they're failing hard at it. And I
Mhm.
wonder if it has something to do with what you and I had chatted about. I don't know if I brought this up for you, but I'll just kind of summarize it. But Mark Gaffney has this book, this audio book, which is really a seminar series he did. It's called The Erotic and the Holy, and he's a Kabbalistic Hebrew mystic. And he
Mhm.
writes about the levels of eros. Level one being that like we're just meeting and we're dancing and we're gonna go home and just fuck the night away, and it's awesome. And then we do it again. We do it again. But eventually, that level one eros, where love is being filled through sexuality, you graduate to level two, and suddenly now you're wondering, oh, are we not like into each other? Maybe our marriage has gone south. Maybe we do need to consider divorcing and marrying other people or whatever. It gets hard, right? It could be in dating, it could be in marriage, whatever. And we go back and try to find that level one excitement again, only to
Mhm.
find ourselves there in level two. And we go back and find it again. So the other option would be, do we work through this level two? And
Mhm.
this is really the path of this tantric path. And then we eventually arrive at level three if we've done this deep work with one another in this divine union. And I don't mean divine, guys, by the way that the your Christian priest or whatever ordained you as a a married couple now forever and ever, the divine union. I mean when the yin and yang, the mountain and the river are one with one another, that sensibility there. You graduate to level 3, and now sexuality is fulfilled by love as opposed to the other way around. And that's where you find these couples that are in their 60s and they're just melting into one another still. There's something really special about that. But Jamie Wheal, he worded this trend now where people were going into this polyamory thing without really consciously being aware of where they're at in their own relationship, their base camp. And he calls he describes it as like this trend of lizard brained fuck monkeys is what he's saying, because they're not doing that work of achieving that, doing the work in that level 2 before they go and find another person with which, with whom they're going to do this work again. I'm curious about your thoughts about that. Maybe you
I'm
can share your own
feeling,
experiences.
yeah, I'm feeling some resistance to some of the language that I've just heard you use.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not you, you're quoting the work of a writer. Um, trying this polyamory thing. I mean, you could say that, people by default were trying this monogamy thing, like it's really, I think, coming from a very mononormative perspective, which,
Sure.
as I said before, may not be the reality of human evolutionary biology.
Right.
So I'm also very hesitant and resistant when I hear this idea of some kind of hierarchical level system um, that is attached to a value statement
Mm,
about how advanced or how developed is some human being.
yeah.
And then I definitely resist calling anybody some kind of fuck monkey. Like I
Mhm.
find that like really offensive actually, and arrogant and a little bit superior. And who's to say that that is not them in their highest level of beautiful self-expression? Really, like who are you?
Yeah.
Not you, Nathan. I'm
I,
talking
I
about just,
hear you. Yeah, you have full consent to use whatever
yeah,
language in reflecting back. I'm just sharing because this is a topic that is so
yeah,
interesting to me.
yeah. So I think like, that writer can, talk about, well, in my life, I have noticed myself moving through these various forms of expressing my sexuality, and this has been my personal growth journey. But to try to generalize that or, say that this is like the path of the divine or the path of the highest spiritual being in the room, I'm just like,
Yeah.
that's patriarchy to me. That's patriarchy, by the way, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so I try in my life to be much more, yeah, just curious, accepting, compassionate, and non-judgmental, because I feel like, again, like, what do you have to teach me, other being? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, what can I learn from you? And the way that I have framed my life may not apply to you in the least. In fact, if you're coming from a very different, ancestral lineage, culture, language, spiritual background, like it likely doesn't.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I love it when people give pushback on anything. I feel like we're all in this podcasting space. Everybody's always just like fluffing one another up. Like I want to really get in there and find out what people are feeling. So
Totally.
if anybody out there is feeling a little bit of like a ooh somewhere in there, it's okay. Like that's okay. We are just like mom and dad are not fighting. Like we're actually just I don't actually even have an opinion on this because my wife and I are very, very happily monogamous. Like you said, I mean, it just really works for us. We've met when we were 15 and we're just head over heels for one another. It just works. So if you're feeling anything out there, like lean into that, feel into that. How is that feeling? Like, where is it coming from? Where do you actually feel it in your body? And what do you make of it? I mean, just explore those feelings because I actually think that's a big part of even your how you show up in the world with your book is like if something doesn't feel right, then there's a reason there. There's something there for us to unpack and explore.
Absolutely. And just, what I say in the book is like, check in with yourself. If
Yeah.
something doesn't feel right, like pause, investigate, and this is like with oneself, but also with a partner. If something changes in your partner's body language, the way they're vocalizing, they freeze up, like just just pause, just stop and check in.
Yeah.
And, we can do that in conversation on a podcast or like in lovemaking or in really any aspect of our life. It's kind of a good way to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that as OBGYNs, we are taking care of people, especially women who may, well, women are showing up and they are being as vulnerable with us physically, emotionally, mentally, as we allow them, as we permit it to be. Some people are going to get there and say, hell no, this is just not a good feeling. But a lot of
Yeah.
women feel compelled to be there, even if they don't feel like it's a hell yes inside of them. And something my wife and I talk quite a bit about, and I'd love your your take on this, because this actually relates to the next thing we're actually going to talk to is consent in medicine. So leading up to that, I'd love to just share with you. My wife and I talk about this very often. And Hermine Hayes Klein, in an interview I did with she's a human rights and childbirth attorney up in Portland. She and I talk quite a bit about this on our podcast. But women from an early age have been conditioned to some degree, and this is me paraphrasing some very, very long conversations with me and my wife. They've been conditioned to be agreeable, to be compliant, to kind of just nod along at times with the program for fear in that dark parking lot of maybe being, injured, raped, killed, whatever. So it's sort of like, hey, that guy's getting too close to me at the bar. I'm not going to be like, get off me. I'm just going to kind of try to smile and nod along until he just figures it out and leaves me alone. But it keeps escalating for, in many circumstances. And then it ends up into this big thing where he throws a drink at her face and calls her a bitch, and like all this nasty language comes out. This agreeableness, this compliance, this sort of like, I don't want to rattle the cage, I think is where I want to go with this next. So as we're,
It's,
yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
please.
it's called the fawning response. So
The
there's
fawning response. I love that.
yeah, so there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are kind of four ways that
Wow, I
we,
have never heard that. That's amazing.
yeah, I know most people just are like fight, flight, freeze, but fawning, what you're describing is actually, I would say, the most common way that when somebody feels uncomfortable with something because of our conditioning, we put on the smile, we pacify, we mollify, in order to try to accumulate the least amount of violence, let's just say.
Mm.
And it's really a shame. This is again patriarchy. And this we've all heard that, why doesn't she smile more? I wish she would just
Yeah.
smile. We
Yeah.
we train particularly, yoni bearing bodies, from the earliest ages to fawn, and it needs to change. Yeah, but until society changes, and we can't realistically expect the drink in the face and the you bitch, you whore,
Yeah.
comment, and that violent response. There's like the fawning is a survival mechanism. And
Mm.
so what we need to do is we need to address the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, the expectation of an entitled feeling of, someone in power has over the bodies, and acquiescence of someone with less power. We need to address those things first. And then I think fawning will go away on its own.
Yeah, it's sort of like saying, I mean, gosh, I don't really want to go this direction, but I think I will, because actually everybody can relate to this, I think. I was going to try to relate this to something like gun violence, not because I'm defending guns, but just because of the complexity of the situation. We have a lot of generally, white middle class men who are going into schools, synagogues, whatever, and shooting up rooms of Jewish men and women or children in schools or whatever else. And while yes, it's probably a problem that people are buying, military grade weapons, across the street from the guy that they know, on Craigslist, it's also there's a mental health crisis on our hands where there's something else happening here. It's not just take the guns away or give everybody guns like that. It's such a binary sort of polarized conversation there. I feel like this violence against women, especially sexual violence, is far more complex than that. I feel like it's far more complex than like stand up for your rights. Like standing up for your rights might actually get you killed. And so we have this other, aspect within our society where the fawn response actually is self-preservative in some ways. Where do we go? I mean, how do we fix that? Like, where do we start?
Oh, Nathan. This conversation could just take us off on so many. It's such a fundamental problems with rivalrous societal dynamics, with more for me, less for you. With this whole mindset, this whole consciousness that needs to transform in order for our species to continue to exist on this earth. But yeah, the example that you raise of guns is one very visible aspect of that. But the kind of violence that we are enacting on the earth and all living beings on a daily basis, it's the same, right?
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need to address violence, inside of ourselves, like that kind of cognitive dissonance that we're asking humans to live with, where they have to block their heart in order to function successfully in this really profoundly sick system. We have to work at that internal violence, and then I believe deepening connection with each other, empathetic listening, true empathy, and community
Yeah.
is the way to address that. But it's so multifactorial, so broad. I mean, it's really a philosophy question that you ask.
Yes, it is. And I'm going to give a little resistance.
Mm.
And we have a maternity care system where women are routinely coming to me and saying, I felt traumatized. They're using the word rape. They're using these types of words because of an otherwise normal vaginal exam while they're in labor, which they said no to. But hey, I gotta have to check on the baby. You don't want your baby to die, right? Now you are being held down by a nurse and your partner, your intimate love, your beloved, and somebody's forcing themselves inside of you. Now, I know that this seems like an extreme sort of thing I'm talking about, guys, but I am getting it on a weekly basis. Somebody wants to debrief their birth with me or whatever. And this is in a hospital managed, well, not managed by, but operated by doctors and nurses and a lot of other staff that really, really genuinely care about people. But these are also the people that are simultaneously offending, the couples that are there to be cared for, the safe haven that is the hospital. And there's a patient bill of rights. And we have a litigious society. We have all of these things that should dissuade that type of behavior for doctors, above all, to stop and say, hang on, let's just take a pause right now and let me check in with this person.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you for raising that. And, I had home births because of that myself. And it's interesting. I was just talking to a home birth midwife last week who told me that she has recently had 3 obstetricians who are pregnant call her because they don't want to give birth.
Oh, look at that.
And I was like, I thought I was like one of the only ones that I knew. Like I said, they are welcome to call me. We can talk about this. I get it, because when you've been on the other side and you see what happens, and then, you feel particularly strongly about your own body, in my experience, or some people do. Let's just say,
Yeah.
it can go the flip side as well, where people have been so impacted by this crisis-based and fear-based model of pregnancy care and labor and delivery floors that they're carrying so much PTSD from just what we've witnessed in our training that they want, just straight to the primary elective C-section, none of the drama. It can go both ways. But it's really interesting because, okay, today, Wednesday, we are actively awaiting word from the Supreme Court over whether the stay on the mifepristone decision will stand or not.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Justice Alito, issued a temporary stay, but it expires at midnight tonight. So the restrictions that were passed by allowed to stand by the lower courts will be spoken to or not by the Supreme Court today. So it is conceivable that they will allow a ideologue, Christian conservative anti-abortion judge to go against 23 years of precedent of this drug being available, cleared for use by the FDA, against all science, all medical data that has been collected among millions of women that have taken this drug over 23 years. And, it's possible that they will allow this restriction to go into effect. You're speaking to why are women being violated on labor floors? Why are there explicit verbal decisions about what they want and don't want for their body not being honored? Well, because we live in a society that doesn't believe that women have a right to body autonomy. And in fact, the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court last summer basically said, no, women do not have a constitutional right to body autonomy. So, this is society wide. We are actively declaring, at least our legislatures and our courts are. American voters, when you poll them, are wildly in favor of a woman having the choice, she and her medical provider, or I'm sorry, I want to be gender inclusive as well, because there are, people who don't identify as being women who can also get pregnant. So a pregnant person and their provider should be able to make that decision for themselves as people who are capable of saying what feels right for their bodies.
Yeah.
We have declared at the highest level of court in this nation that we do not have that right. So we'll see what happens today, but it is quite a day for you and I to be talking. This is big news for our field, right? Yeah.
There's another couple directions I want to go, maybe. Well, let me ask you this. Given all of this stuff, this sort of maelstrom of changes, and is this legal? Is it not legal? Am I going to go to jail for this as an OBGYN or not? I mean, there are certain states, my state included, where it may be that I'm never able to prescribe Cytotec again. It's already kind of on the verge of that. You have to be very, very clear with how you're using it and all this other stuff. But Kentucky's also closed off to like cannabis. So, we're way behind. We're like in a different planet over here. On the other hand, in California, it's very progressive liberal leaning. There's this sort of banner of, liberalism, which by definition sort of means the freedom to decide what goes into your body, to how you're treated, how others, want to be treated. There's more of a conversation there. When you open your practice May 1st, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do differently? I mean, how can we do this practice? How can an OBGYN practice operate with all of the inclusiveness that you're describing? I'm just kind of curious, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to look like a human being meeting and encountering another human being. And
wait a second now.
shocking.
Come on.
It's going to look like a lot of active listening and deep, deep listening. It's going to look like a lot of respect for the life path of this individual, for their history, their experiences, their belief systems. It's going to look like a lot of checking in with what are their goals, what are their concerns, what do they want, and then a team building approach to making that desire manifest. It's going to look like pleasure focused model of care. I want people to feel like their trip to the gynecologist feels good, that it's giving them, it's sourcing them what they need, whether that's body literacy, whether that's a deeper understanding of their erotic response, whether it's checking in about ways that they can, really thrive in all aspects of their life. It's truly integrative care, and it's whole person care. But it's also collaborative, and it is broad. I'm actually partnering. You'll be interested in this. We haven't talked about this yet. I don't know if you've heard the term systems medicine. But
For
this
sure.
is what I'll be practicing. It's similar to holistic medicine, but it's looking at the human body in terms of interconnected systems, right? So my partner is not a gynecologist. My partner is an endocrinologist who has been, treating mostly yoni-bearing bodies for a couple decades now. But from a systems-wide, from the hormonal impacts to the brain, memory, focus, cognition, personality, inflammation, adrenal response, stress level, so we are going to take a interdisciplinary, multi-systems approach to dealing with each individual. So I'm very excited about that. That's, how I feel like medicine has gotten, sadly, with all of this subspecialization,
Yeah.
increasingly siloed and increasingly divorced from the big picture of the whole human being sitting in front of you. And so we're trying to, reverse that.
Is systems medicine also known as like network medicine? Have you heard that term before?
So it does take into account, like network approach, and can involve systems mapping, some bioinformatics and big data analysis, so there's like the computer input as well. So yeah, it's an emerging, it's what happens when you take complexity science,
Yeah,
which in my opinion is kind of the next level of evolution after just basic
sure.
mechanistic reductionism. When you take complexity science and apply it to human health.
Yeah. I think that's great. It's funny though that we have to distinguish it because when you and I started medical school, I sort of presumed that's what I would be doing is considering every aspect of the human. It wasn't until I found end of life care where it was like, oh, let's actually investigate their spiritual beliefs and all this. And actually this is critical. Otherwise I really can't show up and care for them through this illness. Or it could just be not an illness. It could just be you're biologically, starting to, lead towards a state of death, of what somebody once said, permanent failure to thrive. And that's okay, but in order for me to understand you, like it's not a medical failure of the medical sciences when you die. It is actually a great opportunity for us to get to know you and your entire story that precedes you.
Wow.
But anyways, you would think, especially as OBGYNs, with the complexities of, gosh, just FSH, LH, progesterone and estradiol, if you just looked at how complex
Mhm.
the HPA, well, let's call it the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid adrenal gonadal axis, you would think that we would naturally be doing that. But it is funny how we have just reduced it down to like these hormones, mid-luteal on a 28-day cycle, which is what every single woman has. Did you know that? Every single woman has a 28-day cycle. Just amazing how
Really?
we've reduced it to that, over however long. I wonder when it wasn't like that. I would suspect probably like before Rene Descartes, Francis Bacon, and we separated the soul and spirit from the body, the mind and spirit from the body.
Yeah.
No, when do you think when did we take a detour?
When we expelled women from the profession. This is,
Fair.
honestly, I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that unfortunately, this is a system of looking at the world that has led us to our current health crisis. It's led planetary and bodily health crises. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm interested in looking beyond the very reductionist view that our profession has somehow, it wasn't always like that. You're
Yeah.
right, but
Yeah.
it's gone increasingly in that direction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like so many, people who identify as men and women in the system, kind of doubling down on this sort of patriarchal, hierarchical way of not only managing our staff, but also the relationship between physician and the person they're here to care for, and everything else that goes with it. So you're bucking the system. You're going to start a practice that is through and through very, very different from what we experience in the conventional model. And I'm wondering, from a pleasure standpoint, I we can bleep this out if you don't, we can cut it out if you don't want to talk about it. But there was a letter you wrote to Jen Gunther. I don't even know that's how you say her name, another OBGYN years ago. And the first line of it was related to orgasming while you sleep when you remember to use your jade yoni egg on a daily basis. Do you remember that?
Of course, yeah, yeah. Well, I felt compelled to write that letter
Mm.
because she was basically on a PR tour dissing Gwyneth Paltrow and even the idea of a jade egg. And, I really resist
Yeah.
that kind of what I see as very unfortunately typical medical model arrogance, you poor um gullible woman, you're going to believe anything that some snake oil salesman sells you, and I'm just like, wait a second, like, let's actually listen to the lived experiences of our patients, and let's believe their report about what feels right and wrong in their bodies,
Yeah.
and let's work with them, not just demean and discount them. So, I felt a little bit activated by, this so-called feminist who I felt was taking a very patriarchal, very kind of power position, uh, you know, in her communication style. And I paid the price for that. I got, trolled on Twitter by,
Swarm
I
of
would
bees.
for that, and but I feel like it is important that we speak up, just like, I believe that, it's very helpful when we tell our stories of our experience of sexual assault or our experience obtaining an abortion, because or our experience with orgasm, or just like you just shared about your Burning Man, orgy tent story. Like, the more we can normalize these things that are seen as kind of like taboo,
Yeah.
the more honesty, transparency, openness we can have, the more shame can be removed, and the healthier we will all be, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of heresy. It's heresy for an OBGYN to have a home birth in the sort of grand scheme of things. It's heresy for an OBGYN to even talk about sexual pleasure, it seems. It's really strange. There's this sort of pleasure, there's this like void. Spirituality and pleasure are going to get out of our language. Yet those are two of the most important things that we actually do bring to the table in medicine, because we're dealing with birth, we're dealing with orgasm, we're dealing with
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
communication. Yeah.
I know. I was talking about this the other day, and like, with somebody, the history of the vibrator, right, was a
Yeah.
medical device
Yeah.
used by doctors. So, women with the diagnosis of hysteria, could come in and be stimulated to orgasm by their doctor. And this was a known treatment. Like, I have to say, like, when did that become something that we couldn't do? Again, heretical. But I think, part of this is a reaction to abuse, at the hands of many. I'm sure that many of those pardon me, but mostly male physicians of that time, exclusively male, let's be clear, took advantage of their position, I'm sure. And I'm sure that trauma, came out of that as well. But I would love to see. So okay, here's something revealing and kind of shocking. So I have a friend who's a sexological body worker, and I had experienced some modalities, including like trauma release exercises that did not involve internal pelvic work. But I went and experienced internal pelvic work for the first time 2 weeks ago. And that involved a modality that they use called genital mapping and
Mhm.
genital de-armoring. And the genital mapping was fantastic. Obviously, I'm well acquainted with female anatomy, my own anatomy, thousands of. However, I had never had somebody touch specific points inside of me and name those points. So I was connecting, somebody else's, because it's hard to get the hand all the way,
Sure. Sure.
it's your own hand. But I had never, and there were certain points that I don't know that I had ever mindfully been touched in that place before. And it was a revelation. It was an absolute revelation. And I was like, oh my God, like, why isn't this what happens when an adolescent, goes to her gynecologist for the first time and, with a mirror and, a parent present, gets a body literacy education about, this is the full internal and external, area of your clitoris. This is, an area that is extremely sensitive. This you'll notice fills with blood when arousal happens. Like this is the introitus. This is, the G, like
Yeah.
genital mapping as a way to learn about our bodies seems like an excellent use of a well-trained anatomist's, safe, gentle, consensual care. And, the
Yeah.
other thing is, okay, so another thing that sexological body workers do is, and when I previously had my practice, would cross refer all the time because I would have patients who had undergone extensive radical surgeries, radiation with radiation fibrosis, all kinds of scarring, who were numb, who were blocked off from any connection to sexual pleasure. And so, I would cross refer with these brilliant, compassionate, gentle gifts of as humans, sexological body workers who would help people reconnect with their bodies and breathe life and pleasure back into areas that have been traumatized.
Sure.
But a technique that they use is whenever they're doing some work that could elicit a pain response, they combine it with a pleasurable stimulation so that, you can repattern the neural pathways, so can be a treatment for vulvodynia, if, or vaginismus, right, which are two terms that vulvodynia is a pain with touching of anywhere of the vulva. Vaginismus is kind of almost like a reflex spasm of the muscles clamping up with any insertion of an object into
Right.
the vaginal canal. So both of those conditions can be gently relieved with, this repatterning of the nervous system because the mind-body connection is powerful, right? So if every time you feel a certain stimulus, you connect it to a pain response, that is going to be a vicious cycle, almost self-reinforcing, right? But if you can repattern, so now you have the stimulus and it's connected to a pleasure response, now we can begin to rework our lived experience of being touched in those places. So why aren't gynecologists trained to do this?
Right.
It's shocking to me. And what is our point otherwise, right? Like why do we exist? It's a really good question. Like it's an existential question for the profession, right? But I feel
We're
like,
doing here. Yeah.
yeah, no, I feel like finding some way to bring a positive experience back into visiting a gynecologist. This is not something that you have to be afraid of. When I would see advanced cervical and endometrial cancer in Los Angeles, in the patient population I was mostly serving, generally it would be because of some previous trauma with a medical provider that kept that person away from investigating their abnormal bleeding, or the lump that was getting bigger, or there's generally a history of a boundary violation or a trauma event that
Mhm.
that blocked their accessing care. If we made this a joyful, positive experience, we could really get ahead of so much pathology, disease, and suffering, I believe.
I You are so well spoken. I actually want to do another interview with you, and like I
Oh,
want to get into like some of the more medical nuts and bolts, but because I was going to try to transition there, but what you're saying, like this is actually what OBGYNs, if you're listening out there, actually any type of person who cares for women, for their families, whoever, if you're listening, what Jennifer just said, I think is probably one of the most compelling reasons for these types of conversations. Because first off, well, let me set the stage here. When I was in residency, as when you were, the idea
mhm.
of home birth to a lot of my colleagues was like met with a whole bunch of sneers, and it was like, oh, you're going to trust a midwife with that? Like, okay, it was this like sort of lack of information. They must just not understand. How could they be so irresponsible, so selfish? There was that type of language I was hearing. And so naturally, I met Stu Fishbein and I was like, I want to go see home birth. I want to see what all the fuss is about. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever been to. So much so that we, as I've mentioned, we had our second at home, and it was easily the greatest moment, the greatest thing I'd ever been a part of in my life. That's not to say you can't have a great birth in the hospital. It was just so different from our first in the hospital. And they were both unmedicated, both undisturbed, natural, whatever those words even mean. But the reason I bring this up is that while I was there, I was hearing all this, and then I saw it myself, and I was like, oh, this is not an irresponsible couple. This is not a misinformed. In fact, they're way more informed than any other clients that I've taken care of. And I say clients, by the way, guys, because you're not sick when you're pregnant. I just don't have a better word for it. Um, so I started realizing the doctors and the nurses and everybody who are like, making kind of underhand comments and whatnot behind these clients' backs, they're asking the wrong question. They're saying, how could you be so unsafe or whatever, right? And safe is a totally relative concept in and of itself. But
Mhm.
I realized the question they could have been asking is, why are women increasingly feeling compelled to not go to you, despite all of the money and the technology that you have there?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, hey guys, people aren't feeling safe with you anymore.
Mhm.
You've actually said or done something that has made them feel like maybe the hospital is not as safe as advertised. Now,
Yeah.
anyways, I guess you could apply. So this notion that we as OBGYNs are only here to detect cancers, to treat the cancers, to operate on a pregnant person, to perform the procedure of delivering a baby, which most of the time we don't really even have to be there. It's like you guys need to figure out what to happen here. It's like ChatGPT is replacing people's writing jobs. You guys need to figure out how to make yourselves valuable again. Because right now
Mhm.
people are not seeing that value. So
Yeah.
what you just said in the preceding like incredible monologue is actually where I would like to see OBGYN care, women's health care, maternity care going.
Me too. Me too. And we're out there trying to make that a reality. And I feel like there will be more of us. I feel like there is such a need. I'm sure you've experienced this, the kind of breath that you hear from a client when like, oh my God, like somebody's listening, somebody's offering me respect and space to be my own person. And it's really welcome, and it's time.
Yeah. And fortunately for people like me and you, seeing the whole person, which really at the root of holism is not just natural, it's this physical, it's the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, this entire essence that makes you, you, the Jennifer Langness in the world. That is really the opportunity that we have, is to care for all of those parts, to treat you like a real solid whole person. And people out there are really, really asking for this. They're like, yeah, I'll go there if I get hit by a car, but I really, really want somebody just to bear witness to my life experience.
Mhm,
So I'm so
mhm.
glad you're taking this approach. The pleasure in my practice, really the extent of it is, it's not the extent of it, but engaging with that. I'm not doing hands-on body work internally or anything like that. Partly because I'm a male, and I just, it's the whole
Yeah.
consent around that is really tricky.
Mhm.
And I don't have the training. There's people, out there who are these really great therapists, but I do have people do a 10-day connection challenge when they're in my fertility program, because the rigmarole of being injected with hormones and the procedures and the ultrasounds and the mechanical timing your sex and all of that has
Mhm.
actually left their relationship kind of degraded to some degree. And I'm speaking like with direct experience to the clients that have come to me. And I have them do this 10-day connection challenge, which every day they're going to do something new. And it's like, you're going to cook a meal for one another, right? On 2 consecutive days. That's one of the days. There's a foot rub, there's hand rub, there's dancing in a room. You don't even have to dance together. You don't have to touch. You're just going to move your body in open ways. There's like genital massage without orgasm through your clothes. Like, you're going to go back to your 17-year-old drive-in kind of days, and it does so much. That's like therapy in and of itself. Just getting people to reconnect may be enough for them to actually get back onto, sort of be optimistic again about getting pregnant. Like, it's such a critical thing. It's not just these mechanical procedures that we're doing. And so,
I love that you're offering that. And I bet that the efficacy rates of people in your program are higher, you know. And I think any OBGYN or reproductive endocrinologist listening has the experience of seeing the patient who is
mhm,
so focused on getting pregnant. They try cycle after cycle, it doesn't work. They stop trying and oops, they get pregnant.
bam. Yeah.
Yeah. And how is acupuncture during IVF leading to what is it, 25% improved pregnancy rates? It's by this down regulating of the stress response.
Yeah.
It's the autonomic nervous system. It's coming back into our bodies and out of our heads, to allow to allow biology to work. So I love that you're doing that. Oh my God, is that something that, people in California can do
Yeah. It's all
remotely?
remote. And by the way, I have 100% success rate right now. I only
Amazing.
had
Publish, please.
I've
Yeah.
only had 5 people go through it, 5 couples, but they meet with me and 7 other practitioners, from functional nutrition to a Chinese medicine doc to, a breath worker. There's a whole bunch of really somatic work as well. And
Yeah.
they get this big giant box. I just sent 2 more out to clients today, and
Beautiful.
it's completely remote. And it's really just helping them relax back into this beautiful process, that
Yeah.
reconnection. I really think that's actually it.
So beautiful. I love that you're doing that. Thank you for thank you for doing that in the world. And
Yeah.
actually, thank you for being you. Um, thank you for hosting this podcast. Thank you for using your voice and your platform to amplify a diversity of other voices. Thank you for being heretical. Thank you for being an outlier. Thank you for challenging the system. Thank you for showing up in all the ways that you do for this world.
Pleasure. That was very sweet. I was gonna fluff you up,
Oh,
myself.
never at the fluffing part. No, that wasn't fluffing. This is like real,
I
man. This
know
is
I shouldn't have used fluffing. I just feel such a debt of gratitude that I met you, because really I have such a bad experience that has continued. The residues there, but it's like slowly dissipating. And it's when I meet people like you that actually makes me optimistic again about where we can steer medicine and building a life raft. You and I, one's in Kentucky, one's in LA, but there's many of these little life rafts popping up, and it's not just supply demand. It's actually what feels so in alignment with me. And meeting another doctor, especially a GYN oncologist, who actually sees that in me. And I'm like, I see you, you see me. Like, that is really all that I need on a daily basis in order to keep going and down this very, very difficult path. But I thank you so much, really, for allowing me to connect with you and to go deeper with you and to be a little vulnerable with you. So thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If people want to find your book, they want to find your practice, they want to find you and get to know you better, maybe there's some OB/GYN residents out there that are like, oh my gosh, because do have some that are listening. I want to meet
Mhm.
this GYN oncologist because I want to do that, but I'm a little unsure. Whatever you want to share, please take some time to let people connect with you if you feel called.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to maybe put links to my books. Is that possible to do?
Absolutely. Yep. We'll
Yeah.
link that. Yeah.
Still, God, building my website, so that will be up shortly. But I, as of May 1st, I'm seeing people in Marina Del Rey here in Los Angeles, right across from the ocean. So we have some of that peaceful water energy influencing, our experience there.
Amazing.
And yeah, I'd love to. I could put the phone numbers as well. Just a link below. Mhm.
We'll do that. Are you sure you want to do that? Phone number?
Oh, not my cell phone. Listen, we talked
Gotcha.
about this conversation with boundaries. So, I'm that person that part of my reason before was that, I have a tough time when people are in need, protecting my personal space. And so we're gonna do this with healthy boundaries on all sides this next time. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
be respectful of Jennifer's space, guys. This is a consensual engagement, but I hope that you all will find her if you feel called. Your book, I think, should be in every parent's hands in order to help guide their teens through this very, very tricky place, especially with media and multimedia and the internet and everything. It wasn't like that even when I was a kid, where you didn't have a cell phone in your hand. You weren't doing like sexy dances on apps in order to get likes and all of this, these dopamine hits. So
Yeah.
please check out your book. What's the subtitle of your book again? I don't have it brought up. It's a little bit longer. Okay.
And every teen's guide to healthy sexual relationships for ages really 13 to 25, though I haven't met many adults who couldn't use a refresher on some of these, including myself at the time when I wrote it,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I dedicated it to my teenage self, but I was
Beautiful.
also channeling information that my adult self needed as
Yeah.
well. Hmm.
It's awesome. I mean, it's not even long. It's like, I think it's 4 hours on audiobook. You can get it on Audible and everywhere else. Jennifer, we'll link as many of the things that you and I brought up in this very, very colorful conversation in the show notes. Thank you again. And I'm excited to talk to you probably in the next week. We chat all the time. Or we text all the time anyways.
Amazing. Thank you, Nathan. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too.